Hey lads, welcome to Uldaman Legacy of Tier, the longest dungeon in the Season 2 pool in Dragonflight. This will be a very short guide for the trash and boss mechanics in the dungeon. The footage is from Mythic Plus 0 run, and of course a more detailed guide is going to follow shortly on this channel. Mind the berserkers in the first few trash pools. They have that brutal slam, which is big AoE on the ground that you need to avoid. If you get hit, you get stunned. You also want to interrupt the chain lightnings from the geomancers, and also be aware that almost every mob here has some kind of a tank bleed, tank buster, something like that, so be prepared to heal your tanks at all times. And there's also the basilisk mobs, which cast the spiked carapace. You want to interrupt that or purge it if it goes off, as it deals extra damage to everybody hitting them up. The first boss is the Lost Vikings, 3 little dwarves that you have to kill. All of them have different abilities. Eric at the back is doing a dagger throw, which is basically a single bleed to a person you have to heal. And then he does a skull crash, which basically charges at a location on the ground that you need to get off. The red arrow that you see right now is Olaf throwing his shield at the player. Make sure to spread out and hit only one person with it, and also interrupt his defensive cast, which reduces the damage that all of them take. Baylock has a frontal and a cleave, so make sure you stand behind him, and once they reach 100 energy, they jump into their bolt and they start firing at everybody. At this point you might want to stack, because the fire is actually spreading and leaving patches on the ground, and the group is also taking AoE damage during this time, so the healers should be prepared to actually mitigate that with a cooldown. Rinse and repeat, and keep in mind that Eric is not going to follow the tank, so if you want to cleave off of this mob, you have to bring the other two on top of him. On to the next boss, as there is some trash in between the first and the second, but it's not that interesting, so we are now at Bromac. He's going to summon a bunch of adds that you want to cleave off him, and keep in mind that one of them is ranged, so you have to interrupt its cast to bring it on top of the rest. Obviously move out of the Thundering Slam, which is this big AoE circle around the boss. And then be prepared for the boss to summon a Quaking Totem. Once that happens, switch to the Totem and kill it as fast as possible, because it does AoE pulsing damage to the whole group. However, when you kill the Totem, it stuns everybody in this little radius around it, including the boss, and it will also purge a Bloodlust ability that the boss casts on himself. You can of course purge that yourself if you have that ability, and then it's rinse and repeat until the boss is dead. The trash that follows includes more mobs with tank frontals, tank bleeds, and tank busters, and there's also the custodians. They will enrage and start doing more and more damage. In order to dispel that, you can actually CC them and stun them if the stacks gets too high, or you can just kite them around until the DPS kills them. We are now at the third boss, Sention Talandres. The boss starts with 2 stun immunes, which are indicated by the 2 orbs floating around it. And after applying a dot to a player, the player is going to explode and summon those 3 orbs on the ground. Whoever walks on top of the orbs, including the boss, gets stunned, and of course the boss will lose an immunity stack per orb that he hits. After losing all the stacks, he will eventually get stunned, but you actually want to keep that for when he hits 100 energy. At this point the boss enranges, so you want to mitigate that by hitting the 3rd orb at this point and stunning him through the enrage. And that's pretty much it for this fight. The things to watch out for is the crushing stomp that pushes back every player, so make sure that there's no orb behind you, because you will get stunned and waste one of the charges. And after every stun and enrage, the boss is getting a stack doing more and more damage throughout the fight, so you actually want to burst it down as quickly as possible. The last note to make here, if the boss enranges, which just happened on your screens, and he actually has the stun immunes, the orbs are not going to remove those stun immunes, and they're not going to stun the boss, so make sure that he is not stun immune once the enrage happens. The trash that follows has some nasty mob. The weavers that you see on the screen right now have this hail of stone cast, which is not interruptible. You have to stun it or CC it, otherwise it targets somebody and it's going to do a ton of damage to them. The Wardens will cast a Curse of Stone, which you need to interrupt, because if it goes off and it's not dispelled, it will just stun somebody in your party, and after a while they'll do a huge AoE damage around them. They also have a less important interrupt, which is a shield that you can purge, but make sure that the curse does not go off. The big runic protectors are going to do a fissuring slam, which is a frontal that leaves puddles on the ground. Make sure you move out of those. And the other thing they have is the earthquake, which is a group-wide AoE that you need to be prepared to heal through or use defensives for. You also find some bats and some spiders. The bats will cast Sonic Burst. If that goes off, it does AoE damage and it silences everybody around them. And the spiders will spot jump and poison people, so be prepared to do a lot of healing if you are fighting those. Boss number 4 is Embers, this big stone giant, which has few important mechanics. He has a frontal, so make sure you're not standing in front of the boss or behind the tank. And at all times you have to dodge the fireballs which are spawned from the guardians that are spread and activated around the room. Unstable Embers is going to mark all the players in your party, and after a short while it expires doing AoE damage around them, so make sure you spread for that. Also be prepared to use a defensive if the healer is lacking behind. The boss also has an energy bar, and once that hits 100%, he's going to jump into the middle and become immune. At this point, you want to spread your group around and target all the guardians that were spamming balls at you up until this point. Now they're killable, and until they all die, the boss is going to remain immune. To make things more interesting, there's 2 huge fire beams that go around the room. Obviously, do not touch that, and the boss is constantly pulsing fire damage, which is why you want to spread and kill the ads as quickly as possible, so you go back to phase 1. Rinse and repeat, kill the boss, and on to the next. Before the last boss, you're going to encounter the Golems, which are going to cast Thunderous Clap. This is their only mechanic, which leaves a shield to them and does heavy AoE damage to the party. It could be outrange, it's about 30 yards, but be prepared to use defensives here and rely on your healers. The Earthen Guardians are going to cast this big blessing of Tear Circle, which becomes a dome. You want to move out of it because it buffs the mobs inside, and it also does damage to your party, so make sure you're not standing inside. Last but not least, we have the Time Reavers, which have the stacking buff on themselves. It increases their haste significantly, and they also do a debuff on you, which reduces your haste and starts doing more and more damage. So you want to purge the mobs, or even better, if you have a mage, they can spell steal the buff, and you want to dispel everybody in your party. Make sure that you do not let the debuff to stack very high on your teammates, because not only they'll become useless, but they'll be taking more and more damage. You also have to find 2 of these mobs at the same time later in the dungeon, but if you succeed, you will be at the last boss. Chronoloord Dios, the big dragon, is going to cast a frontal at the tank, so make sure you're not facing it towards the group. He's also going to throw orbs that you can see with the big brown puddles on the ground. Do not stay on these. And he's also going to cast Time Sync on a player. That's a debuff. If you dispel it, it will leave more scent on the ground, and it does arcane damage to the player who has it. That's pretty much everything that happens in phase 1. Make sure to manage your space correctly, and also the boss has a knockback, which interrupts casts, and you should be careful not to get knocked into one of the sand piles. During the fight, the boss actually uses energy to cast all of these abilities, and at some point he's going to reach 0 energy. Once that happens, he's going to cast Reverse Time Flow, and over 12 seconds he's going to refill his energy bar. At this point though, you can actually stand in the sand piles because they give you a buff, and soaking them will free more space once you go back into phase 1. However, there's also a downside. You're taking ticking damage for every second that you remain in this phase. Once the boss reaches 100 energy, everything repeats over and over again until you kill the boss, at which point you have successfully completed Mythic Uldaman. So good luck in your runs. Check this channel for more short guides just like this one for the rest of the dungeons in Season 2 of Dragonflight, and stay tuned for more detailed guides which are yet to come.
Timelines are converging. There will be only one aspect, and Murison shall be infinite.